Good morning. This is Karen Hudis again, and I'm very glad to be with you. We've got a lot of things on our plate because we're at a very good turning point. This is reality. We're in reality. We're in a new reality, and it's our reality. And one of the best things about our reality is that we're in charge and we've got the world's wealth at our command. This was set up for us by Ferdinand Marcos and Jose Rizal. There's a lot that we've got to do, though, in order for this to happen. It's just not automatic. It's not like they pushed a button and there it was for us, voila. Our part, each and every one of us here on earth, our part is to do our part. We're part of a wonderful group called humanity, and the thing about humanity is that we all care for each other. Some of us haven't learned to do that yet, and so it's going to be the responsibility of the rest of us to bring those people on board. There's nobody who can bail out. If they're alive, they're part of us. And I'm in the very center of this because somebody has to be there to do it. That's the way it works. But the reason that I'm the one doing it is because I've been taught by the others. And I had no choice. Once I realized that I was it, I had no choice. It was either that or bail out and leave everybody to their own devices, and humanity could go extinct. And that wasn't anything that I was going to sign on for, because as a member of humanity, the thing that binds us together is love. And it's not just love for our dear ones, the ones in our immediate family. It's also love for ourselves. And it's empathy. That's part of the way we're built. We're built with empathy, which is to say that we care about the others just as much as we care about our own families. Now, there are some of us who haven't learned who we are. And that's where I said, we're going to be teaching the rest of the members of humanity what it is that they're signed on for. They can't bail. Now, there are some people who do try to get out of it through various ways, and there are others who might take the lives of people that they thought didn't deserve to live. We know that that exists, but we also know that it's going to become further and further distant as we all take on our respective roles. And we've reached a turning point. I've spoken to you about that. The reason that I know we've reached this turning point is because of some Japanese scientists who discovered the 100-monkey effect, which is that reality very much depends on how our brains function. Reality becomes manifest when there's a critical mass, and the Japanese scientists called that the 100-monkey effect, which is to say, once the monkeys reached critical mass, their thought processes were all part of a central processing unit, and that central processing unit could function with those members of that Japanese species, and it could cross water. All of the members of that species were processing their version of reality, which became manifest once, and it's not just 100 monkeys, but once a critical mass of monkeys had collected. And we, humanity, we've reached critical mass. And I've mentioned to you how we know that we reached critical mass. It's because there are healers who have, they've, they've, I wouldn't say inherited, but they have carried on a tradition of healing through many, many centuries. And these healers have been working together. They know how to work together. And these healers noticed that there was a distinct change in the way the world was functioning. There was a lot of wind, there was a lot of unrest. That was when we reached critical mass. That's when the humanity had, we had enough to reach critical mass. That's when our reality became manifest. And one of the things that I think I would like to start out talking to you about is how humanity has an immortal soul, and the way we process our thoughts as a group is that we're not just processing them as the group of humanity that is now alive, but we're also processing our thoughts with the members of our humanity who have died. That's probably one of the biggest parts of humanity, because when we die, we don't just stop existing. We pass into a different paradigm where we have immortal souls. There are people who don't understand that, but you know what? They still have those immortal souls, and we'll just have to teach them along with the rest of us. And so if somebody should be so misguided as to try to end their life or to end somebody else's life, that person's life has not ended. They've just simply passed into the other aspect of humanity, which is the part of humanity, the piece of humanity that is not alive at that moment. And from what I understand, although I don't have perfect understanding of this, these are very esoteric things and we're all learning together. But my understanding is that we have aspects of the same soul, but there are maybe, I don't know how many pieces of the soul there are, but it's those pieces that then rejoin. It's not that one single individual. That one single individual will then no longer exist, but the various pieces of that individual that make up the immortal soul will continue in existence. And of course, if you're the parent of a child, then that child is going to remember you, their memory of you. That's going to be part of your immortality. And of course, we know about DNA. Well, the DNA is going to continue in that person's progeny. So we have different pieces of immortality, different ways of considering the issue. But yes, we're alive today, and pieces of us are going to continue in existence with our immortal souls. And the other thing that we have learned is that if you look at the way our brains function, they function as modems, which is, I don't know if you know what a modem is. That's where there's a central processing unit and we're connected to that central processing unit. That's the way our brains function. We're interconnected. And also, we have different pieces. Our brains have changed over the centuries. There was, in the very beginning, when humanity was, I wouldn't say hundreds of thousands of years old, because I don't know exactly how long ago that was. There are a lot of things that we have to learn. But humanity has evolved, and at the very beginning, we had one form of brain, and we've had four different aspects of the brain as our brains have developed. And that very fourth aspect, that's the cerebral cortex, and that piece of the brain functions as a check and balance on the other three parts of the brain. And when you look into the science of how the brains function, you can use imaging to see which parts of the brains are active, and you can then tell whether a person is using all four parts of their brain, all four aspects of the brain, and therefore they're evaluating how they interact with others, or they're just using that first very, some people call it the reptilian brain. And the fact of the matter is that some people who are interested in dominating people, in killing people, in pushing people around, they demonstrate that they're part of that rudimentary brain, the reptilian brain. And if you looked at Nazis and the goose step, that's one of the ways you can tell that somebody, you don't have to just look at their the functioning of their brains in MRIs and that kind of thing. You can look at how they march in a group like Nazis. So what we need to do, as we all realize that we're responsible for each other and we're in a new reality, we have got to see those people who are not using their full capacities as human beings, and we have to teach them how. And we will. And the ones that are not using their full human capabilities for empathy, these people should not be part of the political world, because they're bringing us down, and we don't need to be there. We can teach them how to behave, and we can certainly remove them from power so that they don't misuse it. And how are we going to get from here, which is where most of the politicians are actually failing to use their human capabilities of empathy? How do we get from here to where I'm saying we're in a new reality? Well, since enough of us have made this new reality manifest, it's simply a matter of time, and we also have to work out the best way to transition. And we're going to transition peacefully. That's really the only way. If we try to do it through violence, it's not going to work, especially because we know that we are now at a point in time when most of the politicians are, I'm going to use the word atavistic. That means they're acting like reptiles. They're not using their full capabilities. So there's every reason to go slowly and to realize, once people realize where we're headed, and that's inevitable, because, as I said, I think it was about 4 or 5 years ago, we reached critical mass. We're in a different reality, and we're taking our time to evolve to that new reality, that it's now manifest, which is to say, it's inevitable. That's where we are. There are enough of us that are using our full capabilities of empathy to be a guide, to serve as a guide for others. Now, I was going to tell you a little bit about the other side, which is that group of humanity which is no longer alive, but is there present. They're the ones, actually, who are the most involved, because that's probably where most of us are. I don't think most of us are alive. I think the vast majority of us are in that other half, the part which is, they're our ancestors. So that group, we're all interconnected. There are some people who are alive who experience something called near-death experiences, which is to say they died and then they were given the opportunity to return to life. Um, I've known some of these people. Two of these people I work with all the time, and they're giving me a lot of guidance. Now, I'm not a person who um, who experienced death, but I did see the other side. I've told you about that. When I was in my early 20s, I went up a spiral and I saw Jesus Christ on a throne. And that changed my life entirely. I realized that there's more to life than just being alive, the physical part, that we were a spiritual entity. And so what I'm calling the global currency reset, that is the means that we're using to transition from uh, where people are misusing their power and they're not using their full brains to where we are going to be teaching everybody so that we're in a different kind of a world and we're empathetic. Well, so I was saying that that transition is inevitable, and we've got to bring the ones that are resisting. They're resisting. They don't want to admit it. And I was going to tell you about the global currency reset. One of the characteristics of this current reality that we're in is that there was a lot of corruption in the distant past. It's at least 10,000 years, if not longer, that we've been subjected to this corruption, and the corruption is coming from the world's money, because the way that the corrupt people are perpetuating this misuse of power is our money. They're using fake money. They're using money that's out of paper, and then that paper they use to bribe the politicians and to remain in power. And what they like to do is they like to hide and confuse people. So probably the most important thing that we need to focus on is how to resist the confusion, especially because, since I mentioned, we've got this, the way our brains function, our brains are working in connection with the central processing unit. Some of us, our brains are being hijacked. You know what it is when something's hacked, right? That you think it's working, but it's really not. For example, some people's bank accounts are being hacked. The banks don't report the exact amount of money that people have on deposit. Somebody has gone in there and interfered electronically. That's one way of being hacked. But by far the worst way of being hacked is where your brain is being hacked, where you think you're thinking something, but you're not. There's very powerful weaponry where if somebody is able to be influenced, they're going to think they're having thoughts, that those are their very own thoughts, and they're not. They're being presented to them as if it were their thoughts, but it's actually a, a weapon. It's actually a weapon. And these weapons are very prevalent, although most people don't understand that. And because there are so many people they're not thinking, but the ones that are being dictated to by these expensive, it's called mind control technology. These people are functioning in our world and holding us back. But again, as I've mentioned, we're all one. Humanity is all one. So these people are going to have to recognize that they have no choice. If humanity is going to use its full capabilities of empathy, and they don't like it, I'll tell you what happens as we're in transition, because you can see that. I've been on air on DCTV now for 5 years, and yes, I'm repeating myself. And you can see the ways I'm repeating myself, and that's no coincidence. We're simply going to be repeating ourselves over and over until people realize there's no choice. There's no choice. We are in a new reality, and that is manifest. So I was telling you, there are a couple of people that I've been working with very closely who they they remembered that they were once dead, and they actually were clinically dead, but they became living again. And these people, well, they're telling us that most of the people in humanity are in that category of the ones that are not alive. And that group, as I've told you, we are all one, and that group is not letting us be. They're not letting us continue in a reality which is not capable of reflecting all of humanity's ability to think, our empathy. So what is our new reality like? It's going to be a world where people care for each other. And I was talking a little bit about the transition. Many of us are starting to get the picture that we're being taught. We're being taught by the others. And I've very much benefited from the lessons that I've been learning from my colleagues. We've gotten ourselves in a small group. That's what you need to do, because if you're learning something, you don't just sit down and learn it by yourself. You're instructed. And so if you get yourself in a small group, and you will then start learning from the others. And some of these people may be quite advanced. You may have a lot to learn. You may realize that that it's not going to be simple. But one of the most important things that all of us have to learn is how to think, especially if our minds are being hijacked and we're being interfered with. Our thought processes are being short-circuited. But it's actually very pleasant to be instructed this way, because when you love somebody and you love yourself, this is a self-reinforcing thing. That's also how we know that it's a one-way street, because I'll tell you a little bit again about how we got to where we are. That's because of Ferdinand Marcos and Jose Rizal, who they were in charge of the world's wealth, because that's what the Vatican did. There was a group called the Black Nobility that was monopolizing the world's wealth. The distribution of income in the world reflected this fact that there was a lot of corruption, and what Ferdinand Marcos and Jose Rizal did was they interrupted that. Jose Rizal was the Black Pope, and he was then in charge of the world's wealth. He took the world's wealth and he gave it back. He took the world's monetary gold reserves and he melted them down and he stamped them and he created a trust called, well, I call it the Global Debt Facility. It's had different names, but the gold was stamped as being part of that trust. And then Jose Rizal and Ferdinand Marcos, who was Jose Rizal's lawyer, they then established the World Bank. Now, I got into this whole process. I wouldn't say by accident, but I was taught what I needed to know. And also, I was very curious. And so when I was in law school, I went and I looked to see what was happening in the world. And there was something called the Group of 77. At first, I thought it was because there were 77 developing countries. But no, it was because this group was established around 1977, and it was Ferdinand Marcos who established this group that was part of a coalition. And when I was in law school, I went and I studied how that group was changing the way the world was functioning, and that developing countries were being brought on board. And so I wrote a paper about that, and I kept following up on that. And so ultimately, I became part of that whole process, and I wanted to see it through, and so I did. And so I've been joining together with all the various people on Earth and all the different countries of the world in a very large coalition. And one of the things that I had to learn just very recently was that my role was to get out of the way. Because if I was going to superimpose what I thought had to happen, we weren't going to get where we needed to go. I had to learn how to absent myself, how to be, how to accept that my role was very minimal. So I'm told that this is the end of our first section, and I'll join you in another section. And thank you for listening.